for the tidal influx to come in and flood these areas. So we're experiencing those issues as well. And also, we're having our share of tropical events and nor'easters that are causing a lot of destruction along our shoreline. So the plan itself was to start to look at these issues and then to try to take long-range projections of what our shoreline might look like in the future and what we are facing with climate change as we go into it. We started this project actually about a full year before Sandy. We started the planning phase for that, and Sandy, of course, opened up a number of doors for us in terms of both funding and also availability of resources that we could tap into to help us with this project. But during that period, we also had something else that occurred that was of concern to us, and these are the FEMA floodplain maps for our South Shore. This is actually in the westerly area. The thing that I want you to notice is if you look to the maps to the left, or the map to the left, you're going to see elevation points on there, and you're going to see 16 and 18. The red areas actually are V zones, velocity zones, and the blue areas are A zones. But I want you to look at the new maps to the right and notice the drop in the elevations that they've now predicted for the flood elevations in that area. They went from 18 to 15. In many areas along our South Shore, we were noticing drops of 3 to 4 feet within the flood elevations on the new FEMA maps. As a result of that, that obviously piqued our interest. We went to FEMA, asked them about it. There were a series of issues with that mapping exercise, but FEMA chose to stand by them. So we wanted to go and develop the latest modeling to try to see what's going on. And as I'll show you, the methodology that FEMA uses in this area is actually technology from the mid-1970s in this. But these are obviously issues that we were concerned about. And as you look at some of these maps, you're going, for instance, in these areas from an elevation of 22 to 14, there's no significant break in elevation that would cause this. So this is essentially a physical impossibility. You can also see some of the envelopes have linear lines associated with it. Again, this is all because of the problems associated with the mapping technology that they're using. We asked them for a federal consistency determination on this because in our listed activities, any changes to FEMA floodplain maps require a consistency determination. Their first response to us was, what's federal consistency? And then from there, we went into a discussion on it. We approached FEMA about a joint modeling exercise, which they initially agreed to. And then as we started to generate the data and revealed some very significant problems in their methodology, they quickly backed away from us. So some of the issues that we're dealing with, obviously, as we're all aware, this is a very complex topic, and the interrelationships between climate change and shoreline are poor to non-existent in the public realm. The approach has to be beyond the front row, and our jurisdiction, while we have upland jurisdiction, is limited. We don't cover the entire town. So there are flooding issues that have to be dealt with beyond our jurisdiction. The legal ramifications are not understood from permitting, and as we generate some of these new information sources, they obviously generate their own legal issues as we go forward. As you're all well aware, most of us have tax structures at the local level that are diametrically opposed to adaptation in the immediate shorefront, and the towns do not want to adapt, if nothing else, for tax purposes. There's a lot of information on adaptation, but at the nuts and bolts level, at the municipal level, there's very little. And for municipalities in our area who are struggling to pay for fire departments, school departments, those types of things, large capital investments in these things are just not possible. So we need to start looking at solutions at scale that are meaningful to the municipalities. Also, municipalities are obviously making decisions now that are obligating them to long-term costs, and they don't have a good understanding of what that is in the face of climate change. And these are some of the issues that we're trying to work with municipalities on. And then we all know that we have this public versus private rights along our shore that often plays out as we go forward on these issues. In the IPCC report, actually, One of the interesting findings is that, and I've underlined it here, without effective guidance of decision making and the potential for unanticipated consequences arising from those decisions, locals are left oftentimes with the inability to understand and deal with these situations in any type of meaningful way. And that meaningful guidance really needs to, I think, come from the state level, because we're finding that the federal guidance is too generalized often to be useful to many of the municipalities, and the municipalities do not have the resources to develop this guidance on their own. And also, one other note on adaptation planning. There's often a perception and a conveyance in the public realm that these are simple exercises, and they are not. They're very complex social, legal, political, and economic issues that do not play out well in the real world and need very complex decisions and understanding of these issues. So our approach to this has been basically to try to bin this in three categories. We're looking at new data and information that we're throwing into the process. We're also at the same time trying to educate in the public and various groups out there the issues that are involved and what the long-range look is. And then we're trying to develop these tools and policies that will help us in the future better address these issues. That's how we're approaching this study. If you look at the overall project management, you can see that we have a number of advisory teams. We have stakeholder engagement and policy development that's ongoing, but we also have a whole series of data acquisitions that are occurring right now in various areas to help us understand all the aspects of this. So the three issues that we are planning for are sea level rise. We're looking at time and height scenarios. We're looking at storm surge with wave runup, and we're looking at erosion. And then we're looking at how those factors combine with each other in a synergistic way as we go into the future. And so you'll see that, I think, in some of the products as we start to move forward on this. So one of the things that became available after Sandy was the North Atlantic Comprehensive Study. Was an incredible modeling effort undertaken by the Corps. $19 million, probably the largest single modeling effort that's ever occurred in this area, all the way from Mexico essentially up to the Canadian border. They developed a grid, and then what they did is they ran 1,050 synthetic storms to simulate what would happen in these areas, and 100 extratropical storms. And then what they did is they stored this data at save points at discrete points along the shoreline. Months and months of supercomputer time that went into this and developing these results. There's 18,000 save points from Mexico to Canada. We have over 1,000 in Rhode Island alone. And so essentially what we did is we grabbed the model, we grabbed the grid, and then we started our own modeling effort at very high resolution. As we started to downscale the core model, it actually became unstable, so we had to develop our own grid system for this model. And we're down to about a 4-meter grid resolution along a lot of our shoreline right now. So it's the highest resolution modeling that exists anywhere at either the federal level or whatever, at least for our part of the country here. So these modeling simulations were looked at to try to couple, and we have fully coupled models of both AdCirc and ST-Wave. AdCirc develops a storm surge, ST-Wave is the wave envelope on top of that. And so we're able to run those for various events now, and we can predict what a 100-year storm, for instance, would do, or any other storm we want to run now along our shoreline and look at this. We've run return period analysis for 25, 50, and 100-year recurrence level storms for our entire shoreline. We now have maps that depict those events. We've also run them for smaller level storms because part of the issue working with the municipalities, particularly Department of Public Works people and also the emergency management people, is they get caught with these smaller storm events. So we've run scenarios for 1, 2, 3, 5, and 10-year recurrence level storms and projected the envelopes for those so that they would have access to that information for flooding. This is just showing our model, what it looks like. So the colored area down there is an ST-Wave stimulation. You can see the resolution in the model for the shoreline. I'll contrast that with the FEMA map above that, which shows the transects for our shoreline. So what FEMA does is they run a model called WAFIS. WAFIS will generate a surge and wave envelope along with wave run-up in that area. And then what FEMA does is try to interpolate between these transects. The model that we have down below is a 2D model, so that the information is being transmitted not only from the ocean into the shoreline itself, but also along the shoreline, which the FEMA models cannot replicate. This is showing further east along our shore, looking at our shoreline in the Narragansett area, also the Upper Bay area. Interesting thing about the FEMA flood maps is that we found that, as you saw from the beginning, they were showing that the new firms were 3 to 4 feet lower. We found that those estimates were wrong. The actual underestimation of the wave forces in this area are closer to 4 to 5 feet in certain areas. Interestingly enough, though, in the Upper Bay, they overestimated the wave heights, and this is, again, due to the methodology that they use for doing this type of stuff. What we've also developed for coastal engineering purposes for both our permitting staff and also for engineers working in the field is we took all those save points. We took the North Atlantic comprehensive data, and then we ran return events for various aspects of this. This is showing significant wave heights for 10, 20, 50, and 100-year storm events. And there are tables for each of those, so the engineers can go to that and use this information for coastal engineering purposes for permit applications before our agency. What we also developed is a thing called Storm Tools. Storm Tools is an online viewer that anybody can access. So you can go to your smartphone right now and type in Storm Tools, and it will pop up a series of maps that are available through the system. What this is showing here is this is actually showing a 100-year base flood, and then the color codes that extend beyond that base flood are showing what that 100-year event would look like with 1 feet of sea level rise, 2 feet, 3 feet, 5 feet, and we now have a 7-foot layer. As I'll discuss later, one of the things that we've done in our program is we've adopted the NOAA high curves. The NOAA estimates for our area of the country here is 6.5 feet by 2100. So we rounded that off to a 7-foot layer. We also have not just the 100-year, but because our coastal engineering, we have different design lives for various aspects. So we have a 25, 15, 100-year recurrence level storms along with those sea level rise scenarios. When we were putting it on an online viewer, it actually exploded the capability because there are a lot of other data layers that are out there. Excuse me. This is showing one layer that actually has a critical facilities layer. So it's got schools, fire stations, police stations, evacuation routes, all that other important information that's out there. And the municipalities can import that data into the data layer and then start to see how those assets are going to be impacted by sea level rise, surge, and then combinations of sea level rise and surge. So although the surge may not be at your fire station today with 2 feet of sea level rise, it may be within the surge envelope at that point. The other thing that the tool shows is not just the extent of the surge, but the depth of surge. And so what this has the capability of doing is you can click at any place on the map and it will tell you what the surge depth is going to be or what the sea level rise depth is going to be or combinations at any particular point in the state. The resolution of this mapping system is down to 1 meter on the surface of the ground and 5 inches vertically. Very, very high resolution system. So what we've done to make this available to the general public so they can start to look at this and understand it, particularly for those people that are buying or selling homes and understand the implications of this, is we have this, as I said, it's online to anybody, but we've put in place a thing called Storm Tools for beginners. So they can type in their address, and there are 3 specific screens that they can use, but it's standard questions that they would typically ask. For instance, is my property going to be susceptible to a 100-year storm event? and they can type in their address and see what that event would do, whether they would be within it or not. It also has the sea level rise scenarios associated with that, so while they may not be impacted today, they could be impacted in the future. It will also show the depth of water at that lot. It's important to know whether you got 6 feet or 6 inches. That's a big difference. So this tool will tell them that as well. And it will also just, if they are just interested in sea level rise and what the impact of that is, they can do that. And this is 2 tides every day, obviously, that impact these properties. As part of that, we were also then to start to associate it with other databases. So along with our critical facilities layer, we were able to bring in and associate the E91 databases along with this, and then pair that up with census data. So we can do things like looking at density plots now for various areas in our coastal area and see what the density of population is within those areas. And then we can run the storm event and look at the depth of water impacting those either dense or light populations. So it's an important tool. For instance, if you're involved in a mandatory evacuation, this allows you to target the high density population areas to make sure that you get those evacuated. One of the interesting things is, as I indicated, we went and did the sea level rise scenarios. What we found in our state that's kind of interesting is that 5 feet obviously inundated a lot of our shoreline. This is showing our Providence area, and it's sort of an anomaly because we have a hurricane barrier there, which most people will think will prevent sea level rise from getting in there. They don't realize that, no, this is a storm surge barrier. Doesn't deal with sea level rise at all. This is showing 5 feet, but one of the things that we discovered is that when we threw the 7-foot layer on, there's a dramatic difference, and this is not just in this area, it's many areas of the state. For whatever reason, there's a break in topography, and the 5 to 7 foot layers are significant for us. So, as I said, we wanted to understand, we've looked at storm surge now and sea level rise. The third component we wanted to understand was to look at the geologic aspects along our shoreline and see how those integrate in. So we're trying to apply cutting edge science to look at this. We're looking at the historical change. We're looking at projections of shoreline change into the future. And then we're looking at, obviously, the inundation of sea level rise and surge as this goes forward. And we're doing shore face mapping to understand the sediment budget and try to figure out a better idea of where our sediment is actually moving. One of the things that's, again, interesting from our perspective, this is a barrier spit in our state. This is called Napatree, and what you can see here are various shorelines depicted. The red is actually the 1939 shoreline, and then if I was to show you that, that's what it would look like in 1939. That's what it looks like in 2004. So this barrier has jumped a full barrier width in that intervening period. So this is obviously a dramatic illustration of our shoreline, how it's moving, and how we're retreating landward with our shoreline in many areas of the state. These are our erosion maps. They've now been updated. They're using the latest methodology. We're capturing the total change in this area rather than, say, the 1939 to the 2014. What has happened in the state is many areas actually recovered after the 1938 hurricane in 54. And so we're taking it from the most accretional point to the most erosional point. We now find that this better depicts our shoreline erosion because the old maps were actually underestimating the rates that we were seeing. These are done on 50-meter transects, and they show you what the annualized rate is, which, as we know, really occurs episodically with storms, but it's what we needed for the permitting purposes. And it also shows the total loss in the area. And again, these are done on 50-meter transects. These maps have now been updated for our southern part of the state, and they are also available on an online viewer for anybody to go to. So one of the things we became interested in is that intuitively we felt that with accelerated sea level rise combined with storms that we might see an acceleration within the erosion rate. So we set our coastal geologists out on that issue and have them start to look at it. And what they found is there's not a lot out there. They're not very comfortable, obviously, in doing this with a lot more evidence, but they are doing it for us for planning purposes. But what they found is that there's a potential, obviously, for an acceleration in the erosion rates. So what we're trying to do is present three scenarios. We're trying to take the historic rate of change, and we'll project that into the future over a number of shoreline or periods of time to show the shoreline position. We also will employ an acceleration of that erosion with some uncertainty mixed in that. And we have a low scenario, which doubles that change by 2100. And then there's literature to access or that suggests that the acceleration may actually be greater than that. So we have a high scenario of 2.5 times. So we can use the historic projections, a low rate of exponential shoreline erosion, and a high scenario showing a higher rate of shoreline change. So if we were to look at these curves, we have the historic rate that's projected out, exponential low and exponential high. So just to show you this, what we do is we take the 39 shoreline, we show you the 2014, we'll now show you a position sometime in the future, and this is using the historical rate projection. What we can also then do is show an exponential. So again, we have the 1939, 2014, and we can show the exponential superimposed on top of the historic, or we can take the exponential high and superimpose that. Now, the things that our geologists quickly pointed out, which are true, is that this is the shoreline position. So this is not where you can build because we have setbacks incorporated within our program. So we wanted to not only depict the shoreline that was out there, but also the setbacks that get incorporated into that. So again, 1939 shoreline down at the bottom, 2014, showing the current shoreline, a projection of 2065, and then the setback imposed on that. So when you put this on a photograph, you can now see where the potential building envelope is, which would be beyond the setback. So to show you that in some figures here, this is the Matuna Kedlin. This is showing where the shoreline position would be using historic rates out to 2100. The light area is a band showing where the controlling coastal feature is at what we call, whether it's a beach ramp, those types of things. And then the sort of orange area is the area of the setback. So this would show you where the potential building envelope would be, which would be beyond that. And these are superimposed on aerial photographs so that you can start to see this. So this is the historic rate. This is the exponential low. And what they had to do to actually depict the exponential highs, they had to shift the scale of the photograph. And this is the exponential high with the setback calculated as part of that. The reason the setback is growing is because our setback is based off the 30 times the annual erosion rate. So if your erosion rate is growing in terms of numbers, the setback obviously grows along with that. So as you can see, it's not a very pretty picture for our shoreline as we go forward. And this is just showing that area once again, sort of lifting out and looking at the entire shoreline. The purple area is the commercial setback. So we have 30 times the annual erosion rate for residential and 60 times the annual erosion rate for commercial. So this captures both setbacks within that depiction. And as you can see, the setbacks are adjusted for the geology or the underlying geology of the coastline there, which is why some areas it's wider and other areas it's narrow because it's adjusted for that. We're also developing a thing called CRI, and CRI is actually two components to it. It stands for Coastal Environmental Risk Index. It has indices for our shoreline that now takes all the information that we've been generating. So we now have sea level rise, we have surge, we have waves, we have erosion, and we have geology, and we can incorporate that within a ranking for the shoreline. and rank that risk. And you can go back into the underlying table and find out what the source of that risk is, but it will rank various elements of the shoreline for that risk. One of the other things that we're working with, though, is taking all that information. We've also pulled in a thing called damage functions. And what this is the Army Corps, FEMA go in a post-storm situation. They look at various categories of structures. They then try to figure out the wave forcing that was going on there, the surge, whether it was primarily dominated by waves or surge, how high those were, and then they try to write algorithms to predict that damage for similar situations, similar building types. And these are called damage functions, and they break this out by building types. They also break it out for a series of components of infrastructure. So what you can do with that is you can take and put that information in a model. So we have this model now running for our shoreline. It allows us to estimate building by building what the potential damage will be from any storm we want to run. Just to show you what this looks like and how it's put together, we took that Matunic area, again, that you were looking at, and this is the study boundary itself. We did this on a pilot scale before we started to, or a trial scale, I should say, before we moved into the pilot scale. So these are the building types within that area, and as you can see, the Corps breaks them out, whether they're single-story or single-story dwelling on grade, single-story dwelling with basement, pile-supported, whatever. And so we've gathered all that data for the building types. And we also have the E911 database, so we can associate that with each of these structures in a GIS format. What that allows us to do is the map that you see on the left is categorizing the various building types. So those color codes correspond to the building types themselves. And then the other component of information that's very important for understanding this is the first floor elevation above grade. So, or they call it the FFE. We went and gathered that data. Once you have those components within the database, you can start to run the model. And this is what it looks like. So if we were to show you, this is now predicting the percent damage along our shoreline. The left is looking at a 100-year event. The right is looking at a 100-year event with 5 feet of sea level rise. So the model simulates the surge, the wave run-up, the waves, and then using those algorithms predicts the damage associated with each of those structures or infrastructure that's associated with that. One thing that I should make clear is that this is an underestimate of the actual damage. It does not include wind, which obviously is an extremely important damaging aspect. But in addition, it does not include building-to-building damage that occurs. So if a structure gets taken out in front of it, gets transported by the surge into the building and back and takes the building out, we obviously don't capture that. This is another depiction of it. So the color codes are now corresponding to the percent damage. So you can look at building by building and look at the potential damage for these areas. This is with this is a 100-year event with 0 feet of sea level rise. This is 5, and that's 7. So you can see the damage profile and how it changes and the extent of the flooding activity as it starts to push further inland. So these are ways for us to depict this information for both planning purposes and understanding this, but it also is very important information for the public to understand. Again, we can run any storm scenario we want, so this allows us, if we had a storm coming up the coast, for instance, we could put these inputs into the model and actually predict the damage that might occur before the storm even arrives, so that we understand what road or evacuation routes are going to be taken out or blocked or whatever. We're working on further visualizations of this. We're working with some graduate students at the University of Rhode Island here that are capable of taking the building materials and all the rest of it, actually show how that building falls apart in a storm event, where the material ends up, so that we not only know whether, for instance, the house gets displaced off the foundation and carried up the road, but also where the debris line is for the rest of the material that's there. So where does all this go? It starts to go and live in a plan. We're now drafting up the plan for this. It will be called the Shoreline Change Special Area Management Plan. It will be incorporated as an element within our coastal program, and then obviously sent to the feds for adoption within the federal program. What we've done already as an embodiment within the program, we already have performance-based standards within our coastal program, but we're also then moving and looking at a scenario-based system as we go forward. So what we did is we had a climate change and sea level rise policy that's been part of our coastal program for a number of years now. And we used to go out and estimate what those sea level rise estimates were for the high end, and then change that within the program as a regulation change. What we've now done is just adopted the NOAA high curve, and this is what you see. So what we can do is associate time scale with height levels with this, which allows us then to move to a scenario-based system. So this is all getting embedded within this plan that we're developing. The plan will have two components to it. One is the plan itself, and the other will be a series of technical documents showing all the tools, the development of the tools, all the assumptions that it's based on, and those will be in appendices, actually a very thick appendices probably attached to the plan as we go forward. So scenario-based permitting, one of the things we are very concerned about is much of our development here it transfers hands quite frequently, oftentimes with people not understanding the assumptions that the original owner or developer got into, and they're buying situations not understanding the risk. So what we're trying to do is build in an understanding of the risk that they're looking at as they get into these properties. So a scenario-based system is when they're coming in for their permit, not only will they have to address the performance-based standards, but they'll have to choose a design life for that structure. When they choose a design life that matches up with the NOAA high curve in terms of the time scale for sea level rise, because we've got the storm surge maps that are now associated with sea level rise scenarios, they can also then show the sea level rise. So we're asking them to show us how the site and house can withstand the events during the design life of the structure. The other aspect that we're asking to look at is not only the structure itself, but the access in and out of the area, at least within a mile of the structure, so that they can understand their access impacts, because it will do them no good to have a house that's there that they can't access. So this is just sort of showing the steps as they go through that process to arrive at a scenario. Once the scenario is set and they submit it into us, this is not necessarily used for a thumbs up or a thumbs down on the permit. It is, again, to look at the risk and cause the applicant to think about the risk. But because we can build those scenario assumptions into the permit, and our permits get registered on title, they then carry with the property. So subsequent buyers can understand what the risk is associated with the structure that they just bought and what the permitting scenarios were when they originally built the structure. They can obviously be updated as they go forward and get subsequent permits, but this would be required for any new structure or any substantially altered structure within our jurisdiction. So we're also working on a number of other tools and policies, not only for ourselves, but for others. One of the things we developed was a complete parcel level data for salt marsh migration. We used the SLAM model to generate this, and we looked at how marsh migration may occur and where our losses would be, and we've developed an estimate for the entire state for various sea level rise scenarios by community, by parcel, so that we can understand that. It now provides a tool not only for us, but for municipalities or land trusts to focus their acquisition on efforts on areas where there might be potential for marsh migration to occur. Salt marsh restoration is also very much part of what we're working on. We're very concerned about the salt marsh loss in our state. We're seeing salt marsh systems disappear within a decade. Primarily due to sea level rise. So what we're working on is trying to provide marsh capital or elevation right now. We've looked at other methods used in other areas. We are now using mechanical methods for doing that. The latest one that we used over in Satchwas Point in cooperation with Federal Fish and Wildlife is actually It's a system that you can take a DEM, a digital elevation model, you input what you want your final elevations, and this is a computerized piece of machinery that sets out and achieves those elevations. So it's almost like a science fiction type of approach now, but we're undertaking 2 large salt marsh restoration projects in different environments to try these techniques out and see how they work. That first project was in the Nero River, which is a tidally influenced estuary, but these are open ocean salt marshes that are associated with barrier systems that we're also working on. We've also embedded ourselves in several pilot communities to work with them to work through these issues so we can better understand some of the issues with the locals and use our expertise and impart it to them as we go forward to help them understand. But we've been looking at assessments of various aspects of climate change. We've been looking at legal ramifications for these and trying to develop a model process then that would be used for other communities. So we now actually have a municipal decision-making process laid out that they can use to go forward and make these assessments and make some of these decisions. We're also developing memos looking at very specific aspects and providing these to communities on the issues involved and the information they can use and how that information gets used to make these assessments. We're also not only developing this information for the municipalities, but for other agencies out there. We've been working with our Department of Environmental Management to look at their wildlife action plan. We've been looking with Land Trust to look at climate change and acquisition parcels that may be, how do you make those decisions in the face of climate change to build better capacity for the ecosystem itself as we go forward, and we've been developing those documents as well. One of the obvious concerns that we have in our state is we have a very high preponderance of marinas and other marine commercial areas and waterfront businesses in general. And so what we've been working with them also at the business level is to try to figure out what are some of the best management practices to deal with sea level rise and surge and how to make their structures more resilient to these and to garner some lessons that we can pass on to other businesses as we go forward. We want to bring this right down to the individual property level, so we've developed a coastal property guide which talks about a lot of these issues and embodies this information. We've published about 6,000 of these copies, which we've run through right now, probably looking at a third printing. But one of the things that's embodied into this, and there's an online viewer for this, is there are 10 questions that we typically want people to look at and ask themselves, either for existing properties or property purchase, so that they better understand what the risk is in looking at these areas as they're starting to make these investment decisions. So this is not only for purchasing, but if you're an existing property owner, how can you make your property more resilient to the forces that you see? One of the ways that we're looking at this is through the Fortified program. This is a Code Plus program. It's run through the International Business and Home Safety Institute, which is a research facility that's run by all the various insurance companies that contribute to this. But they developed, much like the LEED certification system, a system for reducing storm damage. So they have a bronze, silver, and gold. And we've been working with the Rhode Island Builders Association to voluntarily adopt these practices, because as I said, it's a Code Plus system. But we're providing incentives on our side, and we're working with also our insurance commissioner to build insurance incentives on that side to reduce the premiums that would be required in these areas if they adopt these building practices, because it obviously reduces damage. Historic structures is another issue that's very important to us. A lot of very large concentrations of historic structures within our coastal communities and also along the rivers where we experience flooding. And when we first started to look at this issue with our historical preservation people, adaptation did not exist in their vocabulary 5 years ago, 8 years ago when we first started this discussion. It now does, and we just held a national conference here in Newport, in fact, looking at this issue, and we're starting to see some very interesting take-up by the preservation community. I think one of the things they're still struggling with is many of them still look at the building land or the building and land as one entity. And I think going into the future, one of the things that they're going to have to accept is that there are actually two features, and they may have to let go of the land in order to keep the building. So green infrastructure obviously is a big issue associated with a lot of the development that we see. We have gone to a low impact development design system for all our stormwater in Rhode Island. But what we're trying to do is look at how to go back and retrofit some of these areas to reduce damage. This is looking at stormwater in certain areas for rain events that we're now seeing. And we're also looking at green infrastructure for shoreline protection and how can we incorporate that and make that more available and accelerate the permitting frames to act as time or as an incentive for people to go forward for that. We're also working with the University of Rhode Island's ocean engineering class. They have just developed an assessment tool for marinas, and that allows the marina to look at their operation, how it's impacted by both storm level, return events, and sea level rise, and then combinations of those. They can find out where their critical points are within the marina itself for going back and retrofitting these systems to make them more resilient to the impacts that they're going to see now and into the future. We just recently held a legal workshop with city solicitors discussing these issues. There are a lot of legal issues out there. As you can imagine, just from the information that I've shown you, the legal questions that raises as you start to show homeowners and potential buyers what the percent damage is going to be from their structures. There's a lot of issues, obviously, that get raised there, but there are many other issues. For instance, if a municipality has an area that will be inundated because the road is essentially going to be taken out and the access lost to an enclave that only services 5 or 6 houses, but the cost associated with that is exorbitant to try to go back and fix. Can they transfer that burden through some sort of district that they put that allows those particular property owners to pay an assessment to undertake the civic improvements that would be necessary to keep those in place and keep the infrastructure in place for those are the types of questions we're getting into. Obviously, we're trying to inform and engage the public all along in this process, and we're trying to build grassroots support as we go forward. And we have a number of partners that we're engaging in that as we go forward on this. And you can see some of the partners here involved. And so I guess the big question we'll ask ourselves here once we get all this done is, are we any more resilient than when we started this process? We certainly hope so, but that's what we're looking at. So I guess I'm open for questions. It looks like Kathleen's got an issue. Or a question, I should say. What is the basis for the different setback for commercial use and value investment? The setbacks were sort of a remnant of the old FEMA system. And they've been in our program ever since the early 80s. And we have not changed the way that those are calculated. We have talked and had discussions about whether we need to change the way that the calculation rates are done and go to more of a design life. I think if you look at homeowners, or homes, I should say, within the New England area, the average age of a home in the New England area is something like 129 years. So why would we use a 30-year design life for this other than the mortgage itself? It's something that we're still looking at, Kathleen. We really don't know.
I think that question, Grover, was typed in when we were going through Brian's the geology slide and the shoreline erosion setback for residential and commercial. That's when I saw that question pop up. We want to clarify that. But in terms of CRMC policy for the commercial versus residential setbacks.
So was end user input solicited? Yes, it has, and it still is. Storm Tools is very much evolving as we go forward. As we bring in new information into the system, we get a whole bunch of different questions. We have to reposition the way that the information is viewed. We have different storm tools for different users. So we have one for my permitting staff, for instance. They have their own version of storm tools that they can go to, or people that are going through the permitting process, they can go through that version, and it pulls up a lot of information sets that are available to it. We're working with the engineering community to try to deal with those. But what we're trying to do is tailor the information sources to some discrete groups that we would typically encounter. We have a storm tools for municipalities, for instance, that allows them to access a lot of information that both planners and building departments would want to look at as they start to make their decisions.
Well, thank you. This was awesome, Grover. Mary says thank you. And how to access this presentation for people who could not make it. After today, Mary, I will save this and send out the link to you directly to distribute to the folks you invited today. I did hit the record button a few minutes after Grover started talking, so I can write in the email that the first few minutes are cut off in terms of the context and the overview, but we'll send that link to you. All right. Kathleen asks, what was your total budget and how many funding sources contributed?
We're having trouble trying to keep track of the funding sources and the budget. For instance, Kathleen, we received almost $7 million in habitat restoration funds, but that wasn't used for the planning process, obviously. The planning process and the grants that we continue to seek has been growing. But I would say that it's probably in the order of about $3 million.
Right.
About $3 million that we've spent so far on doing the research and developing the plan documents. It's going to be a long one.
Scenario-based permitting. In scenario-based permitting, how do permit reviewers determine what the appropriate level of design is?
This is a turn back to the property owner. So what we're trying to do is build into the permitting process an understanding of risk that the property owner is undertaking as they develop the property. The property owner chooses the scenario. The staff will not determine the scenario that the property owner has to choose. But because the scenario assumptions, such as seal overrides, design life, surge, all that gets built into the permit document. And we will educate the title community as to what that information is, along with the insurance and banking community. We're hoping that it sends a market signal back through the system. That is, the more of a design life you choose for your structure, the higher price that should drive within the market itself. So what we're trying to do is give people tools to look at property and evaluate risk among various properties so they can make a better buying decision. And we hope that drives the developers and property owners who are looking to potentially flip properties to think about this a little harder and become more resilient in the way they approach these.
Are there any other questions? We still have 19 folks who are logged in. 7 minutes left. Anyone else? I can do last call. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Again, Teresa will, once she gets this recording downloaded, she will send it on to Mary, and people can access the slides and the information. And she can make it available to whoever. Thank you very much for attending and appreciate your interest.